Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to update the Chamber on Scotland's deposit return scheme. There was a time, not that long ago, when I could have said that every party in this chamber backed a deposit return scheme. There was a time when we were all united in our determination to tackle the litter that blights our streets, our parks, our beaches. DRS will increase recycling rates from 50% to 90% and cut litter by a third. There was a time when this was the clinching argument. In 2020, this Parliament, with cross-party support, backed Scotland's deposit return scheme. I wish I were able to say that the scheme we will launch in August...
Excuse me, Minister. At the beginning of this item, I said that there should be no interventions or interruptions. There will be an opportunity to put questions to the Minister at the end of her statement. Until that point, I would be grateful if we could conduct our business in a courteous manner. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wish I were able to say that the scheme we will launch in August is innovative, groundbreaking and world-leading. But the truth is, Scotland is following the example of other countries like Germany and Denmark, as well as regional schemes like the ones seen in Canada. This means we can look abroad and see that this concept works. The lack of uniqueness is the reassurance that it works. The fact that we are not first tells us that we are not taking unnecessary risks. Presiding Officer, I am delighted to be able to tell you that as of this morning, 664 drinks producers, representing over 90% of the total volume of drinks containers sold in Scotland each year, have completed registration with Circularity Scotland for Scotland's deposit return scheme. The Scottish Parliament set industry a challenge to take responsibility for the waste they produce, to do their part in tackling the climate emergency. And I am delighted that so many have risen to that challenge already. I understand there are still concerns among producers and particularly the smallest companies affected by the scheme. We understand those concerns. I have consistently said that SEPA will take a flexible approach where possible. It is important that those producers not yet registered know that SEPA will be pragmatic in their approach. That means that producers can continue to register, even now, after yesterday's deadline. Today sees us move to the next stage of registration, with Circularity Scotland's announcement of the launch of registration for return point operators, the corner shops, supermarkets and other outlets where customers can return empty containers and reclaim their deposit. As Parliament knows, in response to industry feedback, we previously updated guidance and support to make it clearer, easier and quicker for retailers wishing to apply for an exemption to operating a return point. I know there remain concerns about the scheme, particularly from smaller businesses. We have been systematically working to resolve these real concerns. For example, in a package of help worth £22 million, Circularity Scotland has removed the day one and month one charges for all producers, up to a threshold of 3 million units per year. Above the 3 million unit threshold, the day one payments for producers using UK-wide barcodes has previously been reduced by 2/3. And Circularity Scotland is providing 2-month credit terms on deposits and fees up to the same volume threshold to reduce the working capital impact on all producers. I can pledge today that we will continue to listen, which is why I can confirm that my officials will work at pace to explore any further feasible, fair and legal options available to support all producers to comply with the scheme, including the potential to have a grace period if needed. Introducing any form of grace period raises questions that must be fully explored about how it would work operationally, fairly and legally for businesses and communities. There are questions about definitions, registration and enforcement, which must all be worked through. While this consideration is being done, it is still essential that all producers register for the scheme if they have not already done so. Presiding Officer, let me now turn to the question of the IMA exclusion. For weeks now, we have been addressing legitimate concerns raised with us by producers and retailers. Many good faith critiques, suggestions and proposals have been made, including by some parties here in this chamber, but others have not acted in good faith. Some have sought to exploit the real concerns among producers. Some have sought, and unfortunately with some success, to turn this into a political wedge issue. And they have done it using misinformation and deception. With that in mind, let me turn to the claim that the Scottish Government has not sought an exemption from the Internal Market Act. Let me quote what Alister Jack, the Secretary of State for Scotland, told the House of Commons on the 22nd of February, just 1 week ago today. We have not been asked for an exemption for this under the rules of the UK Internal Market Act 2022 by the Scottish Government. No request for an exemption has come. Presiding officer, this is not true. The Scottish Government has sought that exemption since July 2021. It was discussed in the November 2022 interministerial group, in official level meetings and at a ministerial meeting on January 2023. Despite this, so serious was the continued failure of the UK Government to come to a decision on the IMA exemption, the issue was escalated to the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, in January. He wrote to the UK Government in the clearest terms. He said, "I am seeking your assurance now that UK ministers will expedite a rapid solution, including an exclusion to the IMA if that is required." And I have to be straight with the Chamber. For the Secretary of Scotland to now claim that no such request has been made is not true. Indeed, the reply to John Swinney from the Treasury is explicit in saying that the UK Government is working on this very question. So, Alister Jack has a simple question to answer. If we never asked for an exclusion, why did the UK Treasury say work was already underway? His claims are simply not true. His story is shifting and changing with every telling. First, we hadn't asked. Then we hadn't formally asked. And then it wasn't a ministerial request. It's all nonsense. Presiding officer, this scheme will go live in August, and I can say that with confidence because people have voted with their feet. Producers have registered, and I am both grateful to them for doing so and proud that Scottish businesses are rising to the challenge. They saw their legitimate concerns addressed by the Scottish Government, and they decided whether to take part in the scheme. They have done so because the overwhelming majority recognise their responsibility. They don't want litter on our streets, parks and beaches either, and they recognise that DRS is the way to end that blight. But their decision poses a challenge for those in this chamber who have joined the Alister Jacks of this world in their misinformation. I hear you say you are pro-business. Well, business is on board. I hear you say you're worried about jobs. Well, this scheme will create over 500 jobs. I hear you say you're concerned about investment. DRS will see £300 million invested by the private sector in ending the blight of litter on our streets. If you want to prove that you are in favour of business, investment and jobs, get behind the scheme now. Because the choice is stark. On one hand, we have this Scottish Parliament using its devolved powers to tackle the scourge of litter on our streets, and on the other, we have Alister Jack attempting to sabotage the scheme as part of his effort to undermine devolution and Scottish democracy. It's time to choose where you stand. I can tell you where this government stands. The question for the other parties is where do they stand now, presiding officer? I invite the Chamber to welcome the work by Circularity Scotland and producers who have given an overwhelming vote of confidence to the scheme, and to recognise the work that we have undertaken in relation to the Internal Market Act, the confirmation that SEPA will continue to work pragmatically with Circularity Scotland and producers beyond the 1st of March to support businesses with compliance before the go-live date, and the commitment to look at further options available to support all producers to comply with the scheme, including the potential to have a grace period if needed. Thank you, Presiding Officer.